Thank you for joining me today for a very special edition of the COVID Comms Cast. I'm Kirsten Bruce, I'm the Principal of VIVA Communications, and today I am speaking with an Australian travel medicine pioneer and an intrepid traveller with whom I've had the pleasure of working with over many years. Dr Deb Mills is Medical Director of Dr Deb, the Travel Doctor, and National Spokesperson for the Travel Medicine Alliance. She's studied infectious diseases in Australia and internationally, and she's very well published in both medical and consumer news media. Today, Dr Deb will share her thoughts on the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. She'll reflect on the impact of coronavirus on common travel-related infectious diseases and reinforce the importance of pandemic prevention. Well, welcome, Dr. Deb. It's so lovely to see you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Always a pleasure.
I just might start off by asking you, with regard to populations and global travel growing at an unprecedented rate, was it not inevitable that once containable local disease outbreaks like Ebola, SARS or COVID would eventually turn into global disasters?
The world was warned, and the messages were kind of just drowned out by other matters. Everyone was too busy on other things. There's that old saying about we often forget the messages of history. And this happened in 1918 with the Spanish flu. There were people quarantined. There were lovely studies where one city socially distanced, the other one didn't, and the difference in the spread of the virus was kind of huge, and that's the data that they're using to manage this outbreak. So look, Bill Gates gave a TED talk in 2015 about the importance of setting in place procedures. Barack Obama had these amazing procedures in place, which all got dismantled. And the really interesting one was that there was an article by someone in Hong Kong called Cheng in 2007 who said that the reservoir of SARS-CoV-like viruses in horseshoe bats, together with the culture of eating exotic mammals in southern China, is a time bomb.
Could we have prevented this virus? And how important is pandemic prevention?
I really do believe that this virus could have been stopped much, much earlier. I think that there's very good evidence to support that view. And the quickly and well have cut the numbers down a great deal. So I think that we can't stop the virus getting out of the animals, although there's a case for saying, how did this happen? And maybe we shouldn't be eating wild mammals. But we could have also stopped it spreading. Like we stopped SARS. The difficulty with this virus is it spreads before people are very symptomatic. And SARS only spread once people were symptomatic. So it was a very good test run, but it wasn't completely applicable to this.
Do you foresee a decline in the prevalence of common travel-related infectious diseases due to the cessation of international travel resulting from COVID-19?
I think mosquito diseases, which are probably some of the worst, they will not decline, except that people can't travel at the moment. But the respiratory diseases will definitely take a hammering. We've had data from April in Australia, and normally there are 18,000 odd cases of the flu, and this year there were 200 odd cases of the flu. So there's been a dramatic decline, both from people coming into the country with their disease, and also social distancing means that people are not spreading. And all of a sudden it has become terribly important not to go to work with respiratory symptoms. And that is just, that's what we needed. And I remember after SARS, people were very diligent on trains, people were wearing masks, they were washing hands. And within a year or two, the studies showed that people just stopped because it wasn't something that they remembered. I think people will remember this one a little bit better.
From your perspective, Dr. Deb, where did COVID-19 originate? Did it actually really come from a bat, or was it leaked from a lab?
The complicated way this virus attaches to the human cells would never have been able to be predicted by anybody. It's so unusual. So there's very, very clear evidence that it was not transmitted, made in a lab and escaped. There's 96% identical DNA between this virus and the bats. So there's every good evidence that it came from bats. Probably the wet markets were an amplifying environment rather than where the virus actually transmitted, because there are cases reported in November that they found, and they found cases in France from late December. So this virus had been spreading for quite a long time, but it probably got into the wet markets, spread, made itself more known, and then away it went. These viruses will pop up because the populations are growing, because we're encroaching on habitat of wild animals, that we're destroying ecosystems, and we have these wonderful airplanes that everyone jumps on planes and zooms around the planet. And so these things can spread really quickly.
Some would argue a strong alarm bells were set off with the SARS, Ebola, the MERS and the Zika viruses, yet we appear to have been caught completely flat-footed when it comes to COVID-19. So why weren't we on our toes, and why have we failed to protect our population against COVID-19?
No one could imagine that such a thing could happen. And so when politicians wanted to spend big dollars on this, people just didn't support it. If you said, I want to prepare for a pandemic, you're not going to get voted in. I think that, these voices were quietly saying, this is something we need to prepare for, but everyone was just too busy worrying about other things.
Finally, what changes might we see to the way that people travel post-COVID-19?
There'll be a lot of changes to the logistics of how we move people in and out. There are hotels that are becoming popular because they have different entries and exits, so you don't have to go through the foyer. You go straight from your car to your room. Airports, which are being made sort of bigger. Singapore, part of the reason the airport's so big is they want to be able to sprace people out a bit. There'll be things like thermal scanners. This is happening already in some countries. If you walk in through an airport, the thermal scanner will beep if you've got a temperature. Places like Vienna are screening people for COVID-19 as they enter. The Emirates is doing screening. I think screening is going to become very, very common. Nasal swabs. I think trips will have to be longer, because if you have to allow 2 weeks of quarantine when you come back into the country, you're going to have to want to go away for a fair amount of time. Business travel is still going to happen. We have had patients who say, look, I have to go. I'm going to put up with the 2 weeks of quarantine. And then they're going out on a rig where the place is clean. So I think things will be cleaner. Things will be better tested. There'll be all sorts of creative solutions for people to get back to travel, because people want to travel. It's a massive industry. It provides a lot of money for the world, and we will work out a way around it. Look what the changes that occurred after 9/11. Hard to predict what they would have been, but now we're just all used to them.
Finally, a vaccine. Do you think that a vaccine will be developed within a year or so?
I feel confident that there will be a vaccine, but I'm not confident that it's going to be within 12 months or 18 months. And the reports say 2023 before we start to travel again. And I think maybe before it's back to normal. But I think there'll be a lot of travel even towards the end of this year and to, particularly next year, that people will start finding ways to travel.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Deb, and for sharing your knowledge and insights on the COVID-19 pandemic.